Thank you all for coming today. The Illinois Community College Board and the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support are partnering to support the House liaisons through professional development training and resources. We are creating a House Liaison Center that will be a central hub for all resources developed under this project. And we have a great webinar series that we're putting together for you. And I believe Dina has sent out some of the marketing on that. And then we're also going to have a House Summit. And so I think our next slide will take us to our topic for today. And so today we are very excited to have an introduction to homeless in the community college setting. And as I said, we do have 5 webinars that are going to be taking place. And I apologize, those were just up and they fell down. I believe you have all seen the if not, we'll put it in the chat, a little listing. So we have an introduction to homelessness in the community college setting, which is today, identifying homelessness on April 27th, resources to support homelessness on campus on May 9th, and then LGBTQIA+, and that relationship with homelessness on May 31st. In addition to that, we are going to have a summit the last week of May at ISU's Alumni Center, and we'll talk a little bit about that more before we wrap up today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over to Patty Zaccarella, who is our speaker for today on Introduction to Homelessness in the Community College Setting.
Thanks, Amy. I'm really glad to be with everybody today. As some of you who know me know, before I worked in higher education, I worked in homeless services in Chicago. So working with students experiencing homelessness has always been very close to my heart. And it was one of the things that I was really delighted to see as a Perkins administrator become one of the special populations in the Perkins 5 authorization. So I feel like all of these pieces are kind of coming together. So for today, I thought we could review a few things, starting with some definitions, because I feel like understanding how we're defining the terms really often makes the work a lot easier. So I figure we'll start there. And then talk a little bit about financial aid and the HEA and kind of how that intersects with this work. And then talk a little bit about the continuum of care, how the social service community kind of organizes itself around providing services for folks who are experiencing homelessness. And then really kind of from there get into some deep weeds around how we're looking at the scope of need, especially at the community colleges in Illinois and nationally, and some tools that you may have at your disposal at your institution to kind of help you do that at your own institutions. And then I know part of what the liaisons need to do is make sure that information is up on their websites. So I have a couple of models of websites for you to consider as how to organize that information. And then I also have a bunch of resources to kind of just jumpstart your work. I know many of you have been in place since last summer, and some of you have been hired more recently. So I realize some folks may need a quick start more quickly than others. So like I said, we're going to start with some definitions. So we're going to talk about basically these kinds of 3 buckets of stuff. So first, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the House liaison components. And I see the components, I know it's a list of 10 duties, but I see it as kind of 2 different buckets. So there's this bucket that's like subject matter expertise, right? Like you need to be able to understand who we mean by students who are homeless and students in care. We need to be able to talk about financial aid eligibility. You need to be able to know who the continuum of care point person is so that you can do referrals. You need to have knowledge of services and resources. And then you also need to be able to do these other 3 things that I think are pretty complicated. So the first one down here is tracking and monitoring retention and graduation rates for students experiencing homelessness or students in care, doing data collection and then reporting on that information every year to ICCB, and then also developing a training for the college's employees so that they can better identify and refer students experiencing homelessness. So part of what we're going to do in these workshops is kind of work on developing your subject matter expertise. The other component in that house liaison description is this idea of navigation, right? Like these other pieces, now that you're a subject matter expert in these first kind of buckets of things, now you have to be able to navigate students to those resources and kind of mediate between different entities at your institution. So for example, you may need to assist students with financial aid applications, or you may also need to then act as kind of the intermediary between the student and the financial aid office, or the student and registration, or your foundation, to kind of help smooth the way for students who are needing services and needing a little bit of support. You also are going to be able to navigate the student to the continuum of care in your region, and I'll explain in a minute why that's important. And then you also are going to have to publish services and resources on your website. Like I said, we'll look at a couple examples there. And then identify housing during breaks if you're an institution that's providing campus or campus-ish housing. And then this last bullet too, I think, is something worth considering, which is the law allows for you as a liaison to identify additional services and different ideas of ways that you could kind of support students experiencing homelessness. So I am going to show you a couple ideas around additional kinds of services, especially when we talk about food insecurity. Usually, if you see housing insecurity, you're going to see food insecurity. So I have a couple suggestions, let's say resources there for you. But as an example, that could be an additional service that maybe you consider as part of your role. So I thought we should talk briefly about McKinney-Vento. This is the legislation that kind of defines who we mean when we talk about students who are homeless. And this first bullet, I think, is kind of the common definition that I see on a lot of college websites, right? Like if we're trying to ask students if they need help about being homeless, it's usually this definition, that the individual is lacking a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence. And then these other definitions are also part of that larger currently homeless definition. So they may be folks who are sleeping somewhere that is not really meant for folks to be living. So it could be abandoned buildings, it could be sleeping at a bus station, a train station, an airport, a campground, any of those kind of places. It could be that they're also living in a car, living in a park, any of these places that are not really meant to be nighttime residences. And then these other pieces too, it could also be that it's somebody who is currently living in a shelter or living in a temporary living arrangement, maybe living on a friend's couch, or staying with a relative. These are all basically considered homeless scenarios. Or if the person is coming out of institutionalized care and is returning to a place that is not fixed, regular, and adequate, then that would also qualify them as a person who is experiencing homelessness. McKinney-Vento also allows for this other category of homelessness, which I think is interesting. So it talks about folks who are imminently homeless. So if you're imminently homeless, you're within 14 days of becoming homeless by that first part of the definition. So this means within the next 14 days, is this person going to lose the housing that they own or rent or live in without paying rent? Do they not have another place identified where they can go? Do they not have the resources to get that kind of place? And the standard here is that the individual needs to provide credible evidence. And credible evidence can be a variety of things. It can be a court order of eviction showing that you're going to be losing your housing. It can be that the person is living in a hotel or motel and doesn't have the resources to stay there past 14 days. It could also just be a note from the landlord or whoever they've been staying with that they need to vacate by X date. So that all works as credible evidence if you're within this 14-day window. And then on top of that, McKinney-Vento also allows for a domestic violence provision. So for individuals who are fleeing or attempting to flee a domestic violence situation, they are also protected under McKinney-Vento. And note at the bottom, I also put that this also includes unaccompanied youth who are fleeing an abusive parent or a guardian. When we look more at definitions for student in care, because again, as the liaison, you're going to work with students who are experiencing homelessness, but also students in care. What we're looking at for this population is students who were or are currently under the custody of the Department of Children and Family Services. This also includes youth who aged out of care at the age of 18 or potentially older. It also includes folks who were formerly under care or under guardianship and were in a subsidized guardianship agreement. So there are a lot of kind of tendrils that also connect students in care to the Department of Children and Family Services, and they're also eligible to receive support from the liaison. So let's talk about financial aid just briefly. So the Higher Ed Act of 1965, as amended, I believe in 2020-ish, so 2008, the applicant is considered an independent student if they are meeting these standards. So if they're an unaccompanied youth who meets the homeless definition by McKinney-Vento, as previously discussed, or if they're unaccompanied but at risk of becoming homeless and are also currently self-supporting. And this is important because if an applicant is deemed an independent student, then they do not need to report their parents' information on the FAFSA. So that makes that a little bit less of a barrier. Coming very soon, the FAFSA Simplification Act has these changes going into effect in the academic year 23-24. So previously, the current practice was that financial aid offices needed to obtain proof and needed to make a new determination each year. Moving forward, the offices are only required to obtain proof if the student's self-reported answers are somehow conflicting and they need to resolve that. The institution can decide what constitutes reasonable proof in that regard. And then one of the things that the Act also recommends is that documentation will now be accepted from this list of folks on here. Up until now, it's been allowable, but it hasn't been required. So if a student is able to provide a letter from a director of a shelter, let's say, that satisfies as evidence. But it's also going to now allow letters from TRIO or Gear Up or Upward Bound directors, which again before was not a requirement. It was allowable, but not deemed essential as a documentation. And again, this is just that documentation from these folks is acceptable. It's not left to the institution anymore, whether or not these 4 pieces would actually be acceptable as proof to be provided. So if a student provides proof from one of these folks, then the institution has to accept that as proof per the law. And then one of the other pieces that's good about this Simplification Act is this last bullet here, which is if a student has been deemed independent and because of homelessness in the preceding year, then for each subsequent year, it's at the same institution. It's just kind of automatically approved then that the student continues to be homeless as that independent student status, unless the student provides some information to the contrary. There are a couple resources I thought for financial aid specifically that that might be kind of helpful. So the first is there are specific questions on the FAFSA that ask students point blank about their housing status. So that's these questions here. One of the other things for you to be aware of is that students need to provide a mailing address, but they can use the college's address. For that to work, the student has to request it of the college, and the college has to say yes or no. If the college says yes, they need to make sure that the instructions are in place so that the student can actually reliably receive the mail that is coming to the care of the college. And then these two links here, the first one is a good like question and answer about student aid and youth who are homeless. And then the second one is a Dear Colleague letter about that Simplification Act and what the changes are for the 23-24 year. I also thought it was worth mentioning that DCFS has tremendous opportunities for financial support for students in care. So these are a couple of things I think are worth visiting. The first bullet is kind of an overarching all of the various opportunities. The second and third bullets are scholarship opportunities that are waivers of tuition for students who are going to community colleges where they pay in-district tuition, or if they're pursuing their post-secondary career at a state public institution, Illinois Public University. The bottom link is an education and training voucher form, which again is students can take advantage of this up to age 25 or 26. They can qualify for about 5 years of education and training support there. So those are my financial aid tips. For continuum of care, I thought it would be good to just kind of talk a little bit about what this thing is and then give you some resources. So this is the list of all of the continuums of care in the state of Illinois. And this was, again, part of McKinney-Vento in 2009, kind of started pushing pieces together and taking what used to be separate service entities for HUD and bringing them together under one entity. And the idea was that it would better provide seamless services for folks experiencing homelessness. What used to happen is somebody might go to this shelter this night and a different shelter a different night, and then go for this mental health service over here. And none of the providers knew that that person was looking for help different places. Every time that person had to get services at a new provider, they had to do an intake form all over again. So it also just put kind of a lot of effort on the person who was already in crisis. So this idea is that there's kind of this seamless data structure that supports on the back end the continuum of care, so that when a person enters the continuum, now that person, wherever they go, they have kind of a continuum of care ID number that they can use wherever they go get services. So then they don't have to keep giving the same information over and over again. And it also allows for better organization of some of the services. So you can also really see which services are getting a lot of use in which parts of the state. So anyway, so the idea here is that each of these regions has a continuum of care that's a network of the different providers of service for folks who are homeless. So if you can find your town or your county, you can kind of figure out which continuum of care is going to be your kind of home base. And then this is going to be how you figure out how to refer a student to get them into this continuum of care network. There's the list I put, there's a link here at the bottom, which will take you to a directory, and then you can find your person's phone number, email, for the local continuum of care in that directory. And I think most folks in the continuum would be delighted to really partner with community colleges. There's a lot in the in McKinney-Vento about ongoing professional development and continuing education units and things like that. So there's some pieces that the continuum folks are working through where the college really kind of has a real leg up in some of those arenas when you think about Con Ed and kind of those pieces. And then the other piece too is the data system is definitely one of those things that needs some training and some support. So again, I think colleges having all of these IT programs, I think it's another way that you kind of work in partnership with the continuums so that you're finding ways to kind of mutually benefit each other. It also occurred to me that there are folks on your campuses who may already have relationships or connection with the folks in the continuum of care. So again, if you have folks in TRIO, Gear Up, Upward Bound, any of those kind of programs, they may already have connections with folks at the continuum of care. Also, folks in disability services or adult ed may already have those connections established. And then the other folks who probably are already plugged into this are the school district homeless liaisons that are at the high schools. And again, like this is required through McKinney-Vento, that there are these liaisons who are responsible to making sure that students experiencing homelessness at the secondary level are able to be successful. So again, here I put another link. This will help you to locate who your homeless district liaison is for your region and for your local secondary districts. Okay, so thank you for letting me talk at you for the first 20 minutes or so. For this part, I'm going to talk at you some more, but I want us to do a waterfall activity, and we'll use the chat to do this. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to have you put your answer in the chat. Don't hit enter until I tell you to hit enter. And then I'll tell you to hit enter, and everyone will hit enter at the same time, and you'll see this waterfall of answers, okay? So what I want you to do is in the chat, put the answer for what you think is the underlying cause of homelessness among college students. So we'll take like 30 seconds, think about an answer. You have about 5 more seconds. Okay, go ahead and hit enter. Right. You're coming up with fantastic answers, no surprise, right? So things like poverty, racism, classism, generational trauma, lack of income, family system conflicts, yep. Generational poverty, yes. Lack of resources, high cost of housing, lack of parental support, yes. Yep. Yes, cost of living. Yes. Yes, excellent, right? So I think sometimes when we think about why students may be homeless, we often miss some kind of bigger picture, right? Like I appreciate you're really thinking about kind of the larger systemic issues that drive this experience for students. So for example, some of the things that we found were things like this, right? That at the end of the day, a student is homeless because the community lacks safe, clean, affordable housing, right? Alex Kellerman, you have cost of living, right? Who else? Somebody else had the high cost. Jenny Matson, high cost of housing, right? That if we can't create communities where we have safe, clean, and affordable housing, we're going to continue to see people who are homeless. Other issues here, I think some of you got at some of these other things, poverty or non-living wage wages, right? That sometimes there's a disconnect between what's happening in the economic ecosystem in terms of wages versus what it costs to actually live in your area. Also, unemployment or underemployment, we really saw a huge spike in this in the pandemic. And also single parents having a single income. These can also drive some of the figures we see in homelessness, especially in terms of how many children end up homeless with their families. There are usually also some kind of co-issues happening. So sometimes the homelessness is driven by physical health issues, mental health issues, medical bills, costs of access to medication or to services, sometimes substance abuse, sometimes larger security issues for domestic violence, whether that is intimate partner violence, dating violence, parent guardian abuse, right? So again, students are going to come to you with a variety of these kinds of issues. And then when we think about things that we do at colleges that sometimes make it difficult for students to succeed, these are the kinds of things too that kind of come to my mind. So like one of the things I was thinking about was college bureaucracy and silos. Like we love a good form and we love a good process, but often it's laborious for a student. Also, we tend to function kind of in silos. So there may be really great resources in one part of the college that another part of the college isn't aware of, or that students aren't aware of. So those are kinds of things to think about too as you're doing this work. I feel like that also kind of feeds this next idea about jargon versus plain language. Sometimes when I look at websites for colleges, I think, yes, this would make perfect sense if you're an industry insider. But when you think about trying to write for an audience that's not an intimate insider in higher ed, using this idea of plain language, I think, is really kind of a better, stronger design. And I have some resources on plain language, and we'll talk about plain language a lot. The other trend that I kind of see is this idea of kind of like car required programming. So when we think about, especially in career tech, jobs that we know pay good living wages that are middle skill or high skill, that usually require some kind of clinical training. When we're figuring out where the clinical sites are, usually we're just so worried about trying to have enough sites for all the students. We don't always think about the practicality for a student to be able to access that site. And over time, that's kind of become this thing where like a car is kind of becoming the requisite in order to get some of these training programs completed that could really lift people out of poverty. So I think that's just something to kind of consider and be aware of. We also have a lot of course policies that tend to be kind of difficult for students experiencing homelessness. So my favorite one to complain about is the midnight Sunday night due dates. Because if you're a student who's got to use a library as the place you go to do your online work, most libraries close by like 1 o'clock on Saturday. They're definitely not still open midnight Sunday, if at all on Sunday. So those students are being disadvantaged by having those kinds of policies. So, again, like encouraging folks to think differently about equity in these policies. And then even things like assigning group work, but not thinking about places those groups could meet on campus so that students who don't have housing don't have to out themselves to their student colleagues about that. Also thinking differently about internships and really moving away from unpaid internships, right? Because to ask somebody who's barely hanging on to then step away from what their paid job may be to take on unpaid work is not really a reasonable thing to ask. And then finally, we tend to focus a lot around opt-in kind of services instead of opt-out kind of services. So thinking about how you could design services so that they blanket everyone, and then if students aren't interested, they can always opt out, versus how we often kind of organize ourselves where we'll have services, but students have to find and apply for that service instead of it just being something we can kind of automatically provide for students. Okay, so I think we agree that there's a need. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about places to look for data as you're trying to kind of situate your college in this larger stream. So, so these three things I'm going to talk about. The first is the point in time count. The second is the Community College Survey of Student Engagement, the CESE. And the third is the Hope Center out of Temple University does a survey called Real College that also speaks to some of these needs. So this is the state dashboard for homelessness from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. So it's an even bigger thing if you wanted to actually look at the entire nation and then look at how maybe, like if you're not from Illinois, you want to see how your home state is doing with homelessness, you can totally go back a level and look at all of this. But this will actually be the dashboard to Illinois, and then it's organized. Those zones that are that you can see there are those different continuum of care zones throughout the state. So then you can even see in your continuum of care what your statistics are. And this comes from the point in time count, which basically is a count that volunteers do it's usually the last week of January. Folks go out, you're assigned a region, and you go out and basically count how many people are unsheltered homeless on the street. And it's usually, then there's also a count that's done in the shelters by the shelter staff there. The problem with the point in time count is that it doesn't take into account couch homeless. It only really is folks staying in shelters or folks who are unsheltered. But anyway, from that, the 2020 point in time count had a few basic commonalities. So the first is that 30% of folks who are homeless are families with children. Most folks who are single and homeless are over the age of 24. But there is a segment that is youth between the ages of 15 and 24, and that's about 6%. And then the other thing that we know is LGBTQIA plus youth are becoming a growing number in homelessness. It's a difficult number to really pin down for a variety of reasons, but at this point, we're assuming based on some other data that the 20 to 40% of the youth between ages 15 and 24 are LGBTQIA plus. And then for demographics, the other thing that we know is that minorities are overrepresented. So as an example, African Americans make up 40% of people who are homeless. But African Americans only make up 13% of the US population. Similarly with Hispanic Latino, also overrepresented, 22% of the homeless population versus 18% of the general US population. In terms of gender, men are overrepresented. 70% of people who are homeless are men, 29 are female, and then 0.5% transgender and 0.5% non-binary. So this is the next few slides are looking at homelessness using the Community College Survey of Student Engagement. Do you currently use the CESE at your institution? If you do, can you let me know in the chat? Yes, yes. Okay, good. Nice. If you don't, or you don't know, have a chat with somebody in institutional research at your institution and find out. The last couple of years, CESI has added about 15 items about housing insecurity and food insecurity. And it is a fantastic eye-opener, and it's really great data to then bring to folks who are the decision makers about how budgets get decided, how programs get funded. So this particular data I'm going to show you is from this document called Mission Critical, the Role of Community Colleges in Meeting Students' Basic Needs. And this was from the CESI that was deployed in spring of 21. So you can see here, I thought this was really interesting because these are some of the actual items in the CESI. So this, in the last 12 months, did you stay in temporary housing? In the last 12 months, did you sleep in an outdoor location? In the last 12 months, did you ever temporarily stay with a relative or friend or couch surf? So I think it's interesting to see, like, did you stay in a hotel because you had no place to stay? 3%. Did you stay in an outdoor location? 2%. Did you couch surf? 7%. Like, there's a bump, right? It kind of made me think how we talk to students about experiencing homelessness really needs to be kind of broken down into this level of specificity. Because folks who are staying on a couch may not think of themselves as students who are homeless, even though McKinney-Vento would. So kind of thinking about that in ways that you market services to students. And then this other piece, the Housing Security Index. So this looked at folks who had any of the answers under the rubric of housing insecure. So this showed that 14% of the students had low or very low housing security. And then again, if you look at the racial disparity here, you can see that minority groups are more impacted, even according to the CESI. So like, this data is consistent with the point in time count data. Kind of connected to this. So like I said, they had these 15 or so items about housing insecurity and food insecurity. So they also tried to kind of look at other things that impact a student's ability to maintain housing. And one of them being, if you can't pay your rent or you can't pay your mortgage and you don't pay it in full, like every, in the last year, you didn't do it once a month, like, did you miss? And here the number jumps to 27%. Like, think about that. Like, 27% of your students are unable to pay their rent or their mortgage in full at least once. And again, you can see the responses by race and ethnicity, and again, certain kinds of racial groups, ethnic groups are more impacted than other groups. I also thought this student quote was like heartbreaking, right? It wasn't our first time getting evicted, so it wasn't a huge shocker. I just think that's a sad commentary on kind of the state of affairs. And then these were two other things I thought were kind of interesting to think about. So students with dependent children have less housing security than students without, and that students are aware that colleges have resources, but we're only scratching the surface, right? So students who needed resources didn't necessarily apply for them, or applied but didn't get them. And that's something that that I think this project as liaisons, we can really make a dent in that. So the Hope Center, if you haven't heard of this place, you want to. And they're part of my resource list at the end of the show, so you'll have a link shortly. And again, this is all data from the survey that they did, where they were looking about specifically COVID's impact on food and housing security. So looking at kind of this kind of larger basic need umbrella. so you can see here that 48% of students had housing insecurity issues. Nearly 60% had basic needs insecurity. They also kind of looked at, again, like the black-white gap. So looking at the differential here in race and ethnicity. So I thought that some of this data is really fascinating to me. So one of the things here, they did this survey using 2-year schools and 4-year schools. So for our purposes, 2-year schools were the orange bars. So for students who answered that they had an issue, yes, if they, Rachel, we'll totally have a chat about the Hope Center survey, because I think you're the one there. I believe there's only one school in Illinois that's a community college that deploys it. So that may be you. So we're the orange bars on here. Any housing insecurity item you can see. So 52% of respondents said that they had some kind of insecurity. And then here too, you can see where they kind of break this out. Again, this idea about like, did you not make a full mortgage or rent payment? Here at the Hope Center, they kind of take that and look at, how about utilities? Like, did you, like, maybe you did pay your rent, but you had to not pay your electric bill that month, or, you know, kind of the trade-offs that folks had to make. Or did you experience a rent increase or a mortgage increase? Did you go into collections, defaulting somewhere? Did you have to move in with other folks for a little while, et cetera, et cetera? And then they also were really interested in this piece called moved 3 or more times, that the chaos that happens from having to move so frequently as an additional stressor. And there's a bit in the survey too that kind of talks about why they think 4 years scored higher on that indicator. Which is also kind of interesting. And again, like this looks at kind of the different permutations of where folks stay when they're experiencing homelessness. So again, staying on somebody's couch is still kind of the #1 way that students at 2-year institutions reported experiencing homelessness. And here you can see the hotel motel makes an appearance here too, but sleeping in a car or van also got a little bit of a bump here. And then here are, again, some more information around the disparities that we see. So this first block up here, looking at specifically students who are either involved in the foster care system or the justice system, or if they're a parenting student. So foster care involved, 78% were likely to report having a basic need crisis. Justice system involved, similarly high. Parenting students, similarly high. Also, this bottom one, then looking at first generation students, looking at Pell Grant recipients, looking at part-time students versus full-time students. And then again, over here on the right, looking at race, ethnicity, LGBTQIA+ status, and gender identity. Okay, we're gonna do another waterfall. Just want to keep everyone with me. So like I said, some of you have been at this since the summer or longer. Some of you, I realize, may be a little bit newer, but so far, what would you say is your most valuable campus resource for students experiencing homelessness? And again, I'll give you like 30 seconds, put it in the chat, but don't hit enter just yet. About 5 more seconds. Okay, go ahead and hit enter. You guys have really great answers here. So again, a lot of diverse answers too, right? So like the website connecting resources to students, thinking about not just what you can offer on your campus, but looking into your communities, looking at financial aid, food pantry. I feel like food pantry, we see a lot, kind of formal and informal food pantries. Yes, funding continues to be an issue. Yes, yes, yes. The doors office, yep. And local high school counselors, absolutely. Food and transportation support, rent and utility assistance. Yes, yep, great. Being able to be independent for FAFSA, yep. Yep, emergency needs, yep. Refunds. This is great. Yes. Good, good work, one and all, right? And really, what we're hoping is that our colleges become a place that can help relieve the stressors of homelessness, right? So because of some of these ideas that you presented in the chat, so thinking about additional ways we can defray cost of attendance, scholarships, waivers, book loans, supplies, being able to connect students to networks of social capital and social support. So peer students, faculty, staff, and then this idea about resilience too, like that being in the college gives students the opportunity to develop resilience in a controlled environment where they can make choices, they can fail without drastic consequences, that we can have them rely on interpersonal or institutional supports to really get what they need. And I think sometimes, though, the flip side of that is that students experiencing homelessness can be a little reluctant to reach out and to identify. So I think that's kind of the piece that we'll work on around, especially around marketing, right? And also, again, like when we think about advising and support services that are offered, links to community resources, employment referrals, and ideally even on-campus employment to, again, remove the transportation barrier, providing consistent access to the internet as more and more of our forms, I think, post-COVID now, many of them live online and there really are no paper copies of a lot of things anymore, right? So I think all of that can kind of help connect the student to the institution. And then thinking about just kind of college resources that you have that you may not always think about connecting. So having a cafeteria and thinking about how you can use that cafeteria to design a hunger-free campus campaign. Thinking about how you can really be proactive in helping students with Pell and MAP applications or scholarships, creating things like lending libraries, again, like partnering with your colleagues who work in the Perkins Grant Office. Those folks do a lot of this kind of work for special populations. And again, now that students experiencing homelessness happens to be one of the special populations for Perkins, your Perkins rep is definitely someone you want to have a chat with and see if you could maybe kind of work on some lending libraries and some ways to better support these kind of sometimes hidden costs of attendance. And then transportation, I think one of the things we often think is that if there's a bus stop on our campus, that settles the transportation issue. But I think like taking a deeper dive at looking at what's the schedule for transportation, what is your course schedule due to kind of better connect with that schedule, whether it's when do the buses arrive or when do the buses depart. Trying to think through those pieces, also thinking about what is the student's journey on the transportation. So I worked at an institution where there was a bus stop right out front and we thought like, okay, great, there's a bus stop. And when you went to Metra and kind of plugged in the coordinates for like, here's our closest shelter and here's our campus. And yep, there is a route. Look, there's a route. You do this step, then that step, then this step. Which notice is sometimes one of the steps is a little walking sign. And if you click on that, you can see how far the student has to walk between when they get off bus 1 to get to bus number 2 that or 3 that brings them to the campus. So in this case, we actually were looking at transportation and trying to figure out, like, if a student wants to walk almost a half a mile to connect between these 2 bus lines, like, is that really an equitable way for students to experience transportation? And like, what can the institution do to kind of assist with these kinds of things? So I think definitely, like, working with your local planning committees in the towns where your colleges are located and kind of thinking through these pieces is really important. And another piece is secure parking lots. One of the things that we know is students often, if they're experiencing homelessness, will sleep in their car. What we don't often think about is, where are they doing that? So I'm going to show you an example of an institution that kind of just acknowledged, hey, we have students who sleep in their cars. Let's find a way to have them actually do it on campus. We have secure parking lots. We can keep students safe. If this is how it's going to be, then okay, we can manage it. We can also make shower facilities in our gym available for students. So kind of creating almost a quasi shelter environment using some of these tools that you already have on campus. And we just don't usually think about secure parking lots as a thing. But I know during COVID, a lot of us were thinking about, like, hey, the Wi-Fi reaches to the parking lot. So if students don't have Wi-Fi at home, if they can at least make it to the parking lot, they can get the college's Wi-Fi and complete whatever they need to complete. So I think parking lots post-COVID kind of have some different uses. So something to consider. And then again, like, the college has resources around counseling and connection to local resources, state resources, federal resources, but also just having access to things like career services, computer labs, academic supports like the library or the writing center, and then lockers, places for students to store things is super important. And again, showers, if you have a gym on your campus or some kind of fitness center that has that added into it. Okay, so as promised, I'm going to show you some websites that I kind of enjoy. So one of the things that I mentioned was this idea about plain language. And I'm at the end of this session, I'm going to give you a link that is kind of like 5 tips to how to write in plain language. The biggest thing to think about with plain language when it comes to working with students experiencing homelessness is the student is probably a bit in a crisis mode when they are trying to locate the resources. So to the extent that you can, keep it brief. So on the left here is the basic needs program from Long Beach City College in California. And you can see here, they do have a little bit of introductory verbiage, but they kept it to 2 paragraphs. And then under that, it's these buttons that you kind of click on to get food, housing, transportation, childcare, or emergency funds, right? So I thought, like, that was kind of a good layout and good ways in. So keep the verbiage short and use some pictures. The one I actually liked even more than that was this one over here from Northeast Texas Community College. They don't even have 2 paragraphs. They just have basically about a sentence. And then they include a picture for each of the services, because I think that also kind of helps students just easily target, what do I need? I need food. I need, I need hygiene items. Like, what do I need childcare. I need whatever. So I thought those are both kind of good. But for sure, thinking about how difficult it is to navigate is something to think about as you're designing your website with your resources and your links. And how many clicks does a student have to do to get to the resource that they're trying to get to? And then also, I think for the Texas college, they have this right above the pictures. There's this little like button where it's basically like click here. So I think that's super helpful. On the Long Beach one, under each person, there's like a little button for send email. So having some kind of default where the student can reach out if they just can't find the thing that they're trying to find. But ideally try to make it be, to the degree that you can, showing pictures of the things that you're actually providing as resources. And then I want to talk a little bit about opt-in ideas. So again, like opt-in is for the most part how we kind of do things in higher ed, right? Like, here's all the resources. If you're interested, fill out this application. These are two examples that I really like both of these ideas, and I really like how they laid this out. If you're going to do opt-in, again, thinking about plain language, keeping things simple, easy, like short. So this one from Kingsborough Community College out in New York. So this is all of their resources come out of the Access Resource Center. And you can see here the list of services, but the header is free and quick services. And I feel like that's a genius way to market that. But I do think for this, it is opt-in. The students need to go and apply for these different kinds of pieces and parts, but still in all, like, lovely campaign, and it still uses plain language, so I really love that. And then this piece from Cypress College. So this is the college that took the parking lots and basically made them places for students to stay at night. So this is their overnight parking request form, so students can get it on the website and then they fill it out and submit it online. But again, they have to opt in. So a way to kind of reimagine that would basically be opt out, which is we just assume students are going to use the parking lot. If your college is already having students fill out information to register their vehicle on campus, you pretty much already have a sense of which license plates are registered and that kind of thing. So in this case, you may be able to do something that is an opt-out, but do overnight parking, using information you've already got on hand, not having a student fill out a second application. But I've also worked at schools where students don't register their vehicles, so I'm assuming Cypress is one of those institutions. So then you have the overnight parking form. But again, it's simple to complete. It's plain language. That initial paragraph is not too onerous. The application is basically your name, your student ID, your car information, and some emergency information. And then it's basically a checklist saying, like, you basically agreed to not do anything too bananas when you're staying as a guest of the college overnight. And then here are some opt-out examples. They're both about food. So this one here is from Ozark Technical College, and it's called, they're the Eagles, and it's called the Eagle Breakfast. And so this is a program where students come, they flash their ID, and they can get a free breakfast. The breakfast is limited to particular options. So like in the morning, it's I want to say it was like oatmeal, biscuits and gravy, piece of fruit, so it's kind of a pre-planned menu. If students want to opt out of the free breakfast, they can pay for breakfast and get other kinds of things. So to me, that's like a good opt-out idea. And then back to, I say this was Kingsborough again. Clearly I'm fixated. So Kingsborough does this food for thought pantry. They actually have several pantries across their campus, but this one is open to the entire college community. So faculty, staff, students, everybody can use it. And again, it's an opt-out example. You basically just show up anytime between the open hours and you get your bag of food and away you go. So again, folks who don't want to use it don't have to use it. They can opt out, but there's no prefab application that folks have to do in order to access the resource. So that's kind of what I think is the charm. And then I also found a few examples for youth in foster care that I thought were worth looking at. I realize we might not be having entirely separate web pages for the youth in care, but I think it's worth considering. So again, Long Beach City College has two, well, they have multiple campuses. So this is Ventura College and Long Beach College. And so at Ventura, they have this foster success. It's a whole initiative they have. So it's sort of like if you had kind of a trio program, but it was focused on just youth in care. So I thought that was kind of interesting and worth looking at. So you can visit that one. At Long Beach, they again had a whole page that was just about supporting youth in foster care. Sorry, my links at the bottom are transposed. I'll fix that. But this to say, again, I enjoy that it's that it's marketing to the specific group of students that we're trying to support. And by just calling out that it's youth in foster care, students aren't wondering if we mean them or not. So I liked that. I thought both were pretty good too about plain language. I thought that that the Ventura College piece, it's got a little more writing, but it's broken up and it gives your eyes kind of room and places to kind of rest between the writing. So I thought these were both really well done examples. Okay, so we'll finally get to all the resources. So first, like I said, the Hope Center and their Real College Survey. Here are a couple, there's the report, and then also just kind of the general landing. Tons of resources in there. They're constantly rolling out training to post-secondary institutions about how to do more work in this space. So they're fantastic. Can't say enough good things about them. The second grouping is the Community College Survey of Student Engagement and that mission critical report that I talked to you about. And then there's a second report that looks at the colleges who participated that year in question. So I thought that was just kind of interesting information to also see. And the difference between the Real College Survey and the CESI is the Real College Survey, as we saw, has a mix of 4-year partners and 2-year partners, versus the CESI just focuses on community colleges themselves. But if you look at the college profiles, you can kind of see by enrollment and location and stuff like that. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. If you're interested in reading more on McKinney-Vento and all the nuance of the various definitions, I put a link here for that. And I also didn't want us to get away from ICSPS without mentioning that they have some really helpful, great information in their super strategies for special populations for Perkins. And as I keep saying, one of them is for students experiencing homelessness. So they have some great work around ways to recruit and ways to retain students experiencing homelessness. So I wanted to give you that. And then finally, Center for Plain Language has this really great, easy to follow 5 steps for integrating plain language. So I put a link there for that too. And then finally, if you haven't already participated in our House Liaison survey, I'm going to provide this link for you. And we're hoping that by getting some feedback from you, we can use that information as we continue to roll out the next few sessions to include more information that's the news you can really use. So that's the SurveyMonkey link for that particular process. All right. Okay. And if you have questions for me now, I will be happy to talk with you. If you think of something though, after we hang up, this is my contact information. So reach me through my Gmail email, and that number is my cell phone. So call me whenever you need to.
Well, thank you, Patty, so much for so much great information. I would encourage everyone who's with us today, if you have questions, unmute yourself or feel free to post those in the chat and we can share those out. Thank you again to ICSPS for organizing this and for all of you for attending, taking the time out of your day today to do that, and for the work that you're doing to help support students all across the state. So I really appreciate everyone's effort. Do want to just mention, Brittany put the link to the upcoming webinars in the chat, but you should all have that in your email as well. So we hope you're able to join us for our next session on April 27th, identifying homelessness, and then of course the subsequent ones as well. The date for the House Summit, which is in person, just wanted to remind everyone so you can make sure you get that as kind of a save the date, is June 29th, and that will be in Bloomington Normal. So it is going to be in person. We just want to make sure. Thank you, Brittany, for sharing that. I think most folks have probably gotten that in their email as well, but just wanted to mention that was taking place as well. So if you have questions, again, we will hang around and see if anybody has anything, or if you want to wait and hang around with us, you're welcome to. Otherwise, just thank you all again for the work you're doing. Please reach out. As Patty said, I know she's very responsive if you have questions for her, but if you have questions for us, feel free to reach out to myself or to Mackenzie as well. We're here to support you in this work as much as possible.